But now we move to Revenge of the Sith, which is easily my favorite of the 3 prequels, and I think most people will agree on that. I don't need to defend it to the same extent that I do Attack of the Clones, because it seems to be more of a general consensus that Revenge of the Sith is a really good movie. However, there is still a ton to talk about here. First of all, just a general observation. This movie is incredibly depressing, and it gets more and more so as I get older and watch it throughout the years. Like, this is a movie that I could watch over and over as a kid. I couldn't do that now. It's just too damn depressing, and parts of it are really hard to watch and heartbreaking and emotional. But before we get to all of that, I love the opening of this movie. Probably my favorite opening in the entire franchise. The little drums before we see Anakin and Obi-Wan flying together, just so cool. I remember seeing that in the theaters and all the anticipation. One of my favorite movie theater experiences ever. The space battle is fantastic, and you can tell immediately that the production value is better. Everything looks better. The green screens aren't nearly as noticeable. Visuals are fantastic, and Anakin and Obi-Wan have great banter in this one. Even better than it was in Attack of the Clones, and their relationship almost seems repaired in this one. Like, they're comrades, they're friends now, and I loved starting the movie off that way. It also shows how much Anakin genuinely cares about not only Obi-Wan, but each and every clone as well. He won't leave without Obi-Wan. He wants to go back to help the clones. He has clearly matured a lot in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. I really enjoy the Droideka standoff as well. I thought that was a very clear callback to the Phantom Menace. This one is a bit different because they get into the elevator instead of having to run away, but it was very, very similar to that. Let's talk about the Dooku fight, and this is another scene that shows off just how much Anakin has progressed, and this one is more physically than emotionally and mentally, which I was referring to earlier. He completely overpowered Dooku in this fight. I mean, Dooku had absolutely nothing for him, and I was pretty surprised that Dooku was so blindsided by Palpatine wanting Anakin to kill him. I mentioned before that the Sith are always plotting against each other. The Master is always plotting to replace the Apprentice, and the Apprentice is always plotting to overthrow the Master. So it was very strange that he was so surprised by that. Also very reminiscent of Return of the Jedi, when the Emperor was trying to replace Vader with Luke, although of course the end result was much different. By the way, how did Anakin not realize right then and there that Palpatine was Sidious? I mean, anyone that says, "do it," like that is clearly evil. But lines like, "he was an unarmed prisoner, it's not the Jedi way, too dangerous to be kept alive," come back around big time later. And Anakin saving Obi-Wan, once again proving how much he has matured and how much he cared about him. His fate will be the same as ours. Fantastic line. Side note, I really want to know what the hell happened on Kate and Amoidia. Maybe they showed it at some point in the Clone Wars or in books, I'm not sure, but I have always been super curious about that. That is such a memorable line, and their banter is at its absolute best in this movie. As a kid, I used to get super bored by the middle section of the movie. Man, this is so boring. Why is there so much talking? Let's get to the action. As an adult, I find it super compelling. There is so much important stuff going on here. Palpatine in Anakin's ear, constantly stroking his ego, making him feel great about himself, telling him how great he is, telling him that he's made for more. And you have the Council sowing further distrust in Anakin by, first of all, not making him a master, which Palpatine appointed him to be a master and knew this would happen. And then by not sending him to Utapau, which Palpatine also suggested, and then asking him to spy on Palpatine, Anakin was drawn in so many different directions. Despite his maturity in this movie, you can understand why he was much more drawn to Palpatine than he was to the Jedi. They were clearly driving him away. They never understood how to handle him. And of course, you have him fearing losing Padme, having the same types of dreams that he had about his mom right before she died. So he's racking his brain, trying to figure out a way to save her. And of course, Palpatine plants that idea in his head by telling him the Darth Plagueis story, which is one of my favorite scenes in the entire franchise. And the music there is great. Once again, John Williams never misses. Once again, Yoda telling Anakin to train himself to let go, to suppress his emotions, not how to properly handle them. This is how they earn Anakin's turn. We get one of several great lines from Padme. Have you ever considered we may be on the wrong side? She's kinda right. I mean, both sides are the wrong side because they're both controlled by the same evil guy, so you're kinda screwed either way. But she was definitely onto something there, and she was advocating for peace and negotiations. Man, Padme is so based, proving once again she is the smart one. Side note, Anakin and Padme definitely have much better chemistry in this one, but you know what? I think that is once again by design. They are both older, they're both more mature, they've been together for a while. Anakin in particular is much more mature, he's a lot less insecure, and he doesn't have to worry about wooing her anymore. Makes perfect sense to me. But what about the droid attack on the Wookiees? I love that Yoda knows the Wookiees and Chewbacca in particular. I mean, they've both been around a really long time, so it makes a ton of sense. That's cool. We also got a little glimpse at the Wookiee home planet in Kashyyyk, which was also pretty cool. Get a lot more of it in the Battlefront game. I also really enjoy the Utapau sequence. It's the last bit of fun we get before things get really dark and serious. Seeing Grievous fight in live action with all four arms was really cool. I love the creature that Obi-Wan rides. I love another call in the cavalry moment with the clones arriving. And of course, you get a couple more great one-liners from Obi-Wan. Hello there. And so uncivilized. He used his brains to defeat Grievous, just like he did against Darth Maul. Obi-Wan does not get enough credit for just how resourceful he is. It was really smart to open up his chest and then shoot him with the blaster, even though he didn't like doing it. Very good move on his part. Another thing I want to point out here is this was another brilliant move by Palpatine. The whole Grievous thing was a distraction, and he suggested to Anakin that he should lead the mission, knowing full well that the Council would not allow that and that they would send Obi-Wan instead. So he accomplishes two things here. Number one, he further weakened Anakin's trust in the Jedi, and number two, he made sure that Obi-Wan was gone for Anakin's turn, because I believe that if Obi-Wan was there is a very good chance that Anakin would not have turned. I do still think Obi-Wan wasn't the right master for them, but at this point, they actually had a really good relationship, and they had become friends, and the last time we saw them together before Anakin turned was a really nice moment. May the Force be with you, you're going to be a master soon. So Obi-Wan being gone played a huge part in Anakin turning. Palpatine outing himself was also a great scene, and at this point he knew Anakin was coming to him. There was no stopping it. I'm honestly surprised it took Anakin this long to realize it. I mean, Palpatine has been dropping massive hints throughout the entire movie. I mean, come on. Talking about the Darth Plagueis story and you can't learn it from a Jedi and all that. He made it pretty obvious, so he decided, oh, I'm just going to tell him now. I got him. And up until this point, despite all of his fears, despite all of the mixed emotions about the Jedi and Palpatine, Anakin is still doing the right thing. He has done a great job up until this point in the movie, and he was so close. We were so close to never getting the Empire, but all he needed was a little push, and that push was the Padme's rumination scene, which is one of my favorite scenes in the franchise. It is absolutely beautiful. John Williams hits once again with the Padme's ruminations music. Absolutely gorgeous and tragic. Fits the scene perfectly. And I don't know how someone can watch this scene and tell me that Hayden is a bad actor. Maybe they can say he delivers some of his lines poorly. Understandable, but he can definitely convey emotions without having to say anything, and he does a perfect job of that in this scene. This was absolutely the tipping point. You can see it on his face. He's just too afraid of losing Padme. He cannot let her die. He needs to do everything he can to keep her alive. The Mace Windu versus Palpatine fight is admittedly a bit of a letdown when it comes to the choreography. However, it is still incredibly intense. Palpatine's scream is terrifying and haunting. It's the first time we see him use a lightsaber, which was pretty cool. We get a demonstration of how powerful he is when he kills 3 Jedi right off the bat. And we get a demonstration of how powerful and how good of a swordsman Mace Windu is, because he beats Palpatine. And yes, he beat him. He beat him straight up, fair and square. There is no chance Palpatine let him win. I understand that he wanted Anakin to turn, but Anakin wasn't there yet. I know that he has really good foresight, but I truly believe he would not take that chance. Mace Windu absolutely won that fight, and George Lucas has straight up said it. However, I do believe that once Anakin arrives, Palpatine fakes being much weaker than he really is in order to manipulate Anakin. This brings us back to the conversation we had earlier regarding he was too dangerous to be kept alive, an unarmed prisoner. It's not the Jedi way. And I think Mace Windu was totally in the right to kill Sidious here. In most cases, I think killing an unarmed prisoner is a bad thing. However, I've also said that I agree with Qui-Gon with the fact that the Jedi Code should be broken sometimes if it's the right thing to do, and I fully believe killing Sidious was the right thing to do here. The guy was just way too powerful, physically powerful, and also, like Mace said, he controlled the Senate and the courts. He's in charge of everything. There's no chance they could leave him alive. He was literally the most dangerous and powerful person in the galaxy, and the lines regarding Dooku that Anakin and Palpatine exchanged earlier in the movie came back around. The Jedi Code is not always right. Now, I have alluded to this throughout the video, but it is time for me to formally address this criticism that I hear constantly that Anakin's turn was not earned. I truly do not understand this criticism. There are a lot of legitimate problems that the prequels have that bother people, and I totally understand, even if some of them don't necessarily bother me as much. But this is one that I legitimately do not understand. I think they planted the seeds perfectly. I think they built up to it perfectly. It was absolutely earned. This was a kid who was taken from his mom when he was young, 9 years old, so old enough to remember her and have formed a serious relationship with her, but too young to really know how to handle it. He's training with the Jedi for 10 years, doesn't see his mom or the love of his life for those 10 years. Palpatine strokes his ego from the beginning. He's in his ear from the start. Will watch your career with great interest. The love of his life comes back into his life after 10 years of not seeing her. Again, Jedi did not teach him how to properly deal with his emotions, so he does not know how to handle that. He's awkward, he is emotional, he's insecure, and then his mom dies after not seeing her for those same 10 years, after he had dreams about it that told him this was going to happen. Padme then falls in love with him. They get married. He has dreams about her, furthering his fear of loss, the same types of dreams that he had about his mom. He is so obsessed with saving her and making sure that she survives, gets revenge on Dooku and kills an unarmed prisoner. Palpatine continues to stroke his ego, telling him he's the best Jedi in the world. He'd be the right choice for this mission. The council should make him a master. While they are denying all of these requests, sowing further mistrust in the Jedi from Anakin's perspective. He is so afraid of Padme dying. He does not trust the Jedi. He trusts Palpatine more, and he knows that Palpatine is the person who can save Padme. And with all of that, he was still probably going to do the right thing. Despite all of this sowing in his head, he's like, I am going to turn him in to the Jedi Council because it's the right thing to do. He had really matured up until this point, but the Padme's rumination scene was the tipping point, and all came to a head, and he just decided he could not let Palpatine die. He was too important to him. Despite all of that, he still tried to convince Mace Windu to spare Palpatine and let him stand trial instead. Again, Mace was in the right here, but Anakin tried. And most importantly, he had a come-to-God moment here. He had to make a choice. Let Palpatine die or save him and therefore save his wife. He decided on the latter. He just couldn't let Palpatine die. He was too important to him. And at this point, after he assisted in the death of Mace Windu, what was he supposed to do? I mean, is he going to go back to the Jedi? Whoops, I accidentally killed one of our highest-ranking members. Of course not. This was the point of no return. He had to go full Darth Vader at this point. I don't understand what else he could have done. So even if you want to say that prior to this, his turn wasn't earned, this was his come-to-God moment, and he made the wrong choice. So there was no turning back. This is a criticism I seriously have never understood. This is also where Palpatine goes full Emperor. I mean, the look, the voice, all of it. The wrinkles. When I was a little kid, I used to always think that I looked like Emperor Palpatine when I got out of the bath. The hood. I mean, he is full Return of the Jedi Emperor here. This is the guy that we remember. Once more, the Sith shall rule the galaxy. Yep, that is him. Order 66 is absolutely brutal. I mentioned this before, but the older I get, the more I watch this movie, the more depressing and difficult to rewatch it becomes. I was mostly referring to this sequence when I said that. John Williams' haunting music elevates the emotions of the sequence. Obi-Wan's creature dying while screaming is devastating. Yoda feeling it and touching his heart is devastating. The youngling scene is brutal. I have to brace myself for that scene every single time that I watch this movie. Marks the end of the Jedi Order and the end of a fun Star Wars adventure. Basically, the entire rest of this movie is incredibly dark and depressing. Very good, very compelling, but very bleak. You do get a little break from despair in between Order 66 and the Padme stuff on Mustafar. Not much of one, but it was nice to be able to breathe for a minute there. I love the scene that has Anakin killing the Separatist leaders side by side with Palpatine forming the Empire for multiple reasons. First of all, we have the Chancellor now becoming the Emperor, basically installing himself as dictator of the entire galaxy, and everyone loves it. They're cheering, and we get a fantastic line from Padme. This is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. What a great line, and once again, Padme showing that she is the logical one, she is the smartest, most ethical character in the trilogy, and she's the only one that recognizes that this is a very bad thing. On top of that, we get to see just how ruthless Anakin has become. Anakin is gone, he is Darth Vader, and we see that physically as well with his yellow eyes, which in the Star Wars universe is a sign of evil. Obi-Wan having to tell Padme about Anakin was also incredibly devastating. You can tell how awful he feels telling her this, how badly he wishes this wasn't true. I mean, the shake in his voice when he says, killing younglings, and of course Padme doesn't want to believe it, but you can tell that she probably knows that it's true. Incredible work from both Ewan and Natalie here. I thought the scene on Mustafar with Anakin and Padme was heartbreaking and really well done. You'll hear a lot of people complain about the "you're breaking my heart" line, saying that they're telling instead of showing, but honestly, I think that's a totally realistic thing for someone in this situation to say, and I think that Natalie did a great job here selling just how heartbroken Padme was over everything Anakin was doing, and I think that Hayden sold really well just how consumed Anakin was by the dark side and his lust for power, and it's some very twisted poetry that Anakin going to the dark side to save Padme is ultimately what actually leads to her death. So if he would have just let things play out, they would have turned out fine. Absolutely tragic. I love the pre-fight dialogue from Anakin and Obi-Wan. I know the "you will try" line delivery gets a lot of flack, but I thought Hayden delivered it perfectly, which leads into the final battles, and they are great. Of course, the Anakin and Obi-Wan fight is significantly longer, and it is definitely very choreographed, but I think that makes sense. These are two Jedi in their prime who know each other's moves very well, and it makes for a much more entertaining battle. This is easily the second best lightsaber fight in the prequel trilogy after the Darth Maul fight. I love how it is constantly changing settings and dynamics to keep it interesting. They start on the platform, then go into the control room, and then they accidentally turn off the shields, and then they're on the bridge, and then they're on the platforms on the lava, and then of course you have the high ground thing. I love how they force each other at the same time. Such a cool fight. And then you have the Battle of the Heroes that transitions into Duel of the Fates so seamlessly, and I get chills every single time that happens. Of course, the Yoda versus Sidious fight is significantly shorter, but still very entertaining. When Yoda forces the Praetorian Guards, I laugh my ass off every single time. I remember that got a huge laugh in the theater. One of the few little moments of levity in the movie, certainly one of the few in the second half of the movie. They're few and far between, so that was a nice little moment there. I also like the touch of seeing the lightning in Yoda's eyes. That was really cool, and it ends in a stalemate. As far as the high ground thing goes, Obi-Wan is a very smart guy. He learned his lesson from Darth Maul's mistake in The Phantom Menace. There was no way he was going to make that mistake himself. He knew this fight was over. He wins, but he can't bring himself to finish off Anakin. And that makes sense. They had formed a really nice bond, and he said it himself, "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." Absolutely devastating line. And Anakin getting burned was pretty brutal, too. I mean, that, I believe, was the main reason this got rated PG-13, and that was by far and away the most intense thing I ever saw at the time when I saw this in theaters, and it was pretty scary. We get some more very tragic poetry as Padme dies while Darth Vader is born. Of course, he was already Darth Vader at this point, but the Vader that we know, the more machine than man, with the breathing and everything. And I'm not entirely sure that's a coincidence. I know they say in the movie that Padme died of a broken heart, that she lost the will to live. I know a lot of people make fun of that. I like to believe that Palpatine had something to do with it. I think that he, in a way, transferred the life force from Padme in order to keep Darth Vader alive. And that's not a theory that I came up with. I see that all over, but that's what I choose to believe because it makes more sense, honestly, and that is certainly something that Palpatine would do. After all of this incredibly depressing film with all the Jedi dying, Padme dying, Anakin going bad, the Empire being formed, we do get a little glimmer of hope at the end with Luke and Leia being born and brought into the homes that we know and love from A New Hope, knowing that those movies will end much better. So it was nice to get that little moment there, and it was also really cool to learn that Qui-Gon was actually the first Jedi to ever learn how to be a Force ghost. So that's pretty cool, further proving that he is the GOAT in my eyes. And it was funny how Obi-Wan's like, training? Like he was questioning, really, any more training, Yoda? That was cool. So a nice, hopeful ending to a very good, but very bleak and depressing film.